From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight. More than 100,000 Michigan voters marked uncommitted on their ballots during the swing state's Democratic presidential primary on Tuesday. That is well above the 10,000 vote goal set by the movement's leaders. In Dearborn, Uncommitted received around 56% of the vote, with President Joe Biden at about 40%. In 2020, Biden defeated former President Donald Trump, who will likely be his opponent in November again, by 150,000 votes in Michigan. Meanwhile, Trump defeated former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's 2016 by roughly 11,000 votes. Leaders and supporters of the Listen to Michigan campaign made clear that their goal was not to harm Biden's general election prospects. Rather, they want to convince him to change course on Gaza. The U.S. armed Israeli military has killed nearly 30,000 people in less than 5 months in Gaza.
I did not vote for Biden, and we are giving the message that anything but Biden. We are abandoning Biden because of his policies, because he abandoned his people. He abandoned Michigan, he abandoned Muslims, he abandoned the minorities. He took our vote, and now he just turned around and stabbed us in the back. And he's not listening to us, and he's not calling for ceasefire. So we are abandoning him just like he abandoned us. He crossed Muslims' red line, so we are not going to support Biden no matter what. Not now, not in November.
My vote is uncommitted, and to support our women and children in Gaza and Palestine. Innocent people are being killed every single day. Hopefully, our voice, all the Arab community here in Michigan will be heard.
President Joe Biden has reaffirmed that he is a Zionist. Speaking on NBC TV program, he said one does not have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. But in the same breath, he advised Israel to make peace with the Palestinians for its own security. The president noted that a process is underway. He also said a two-state solution will guarantee the security of Israel and the independence of Palestinians. Regarding a possible Israeli operation in Rafah, Biden said that the Israelis have promised him that they will evacuate significant portions of Rafah before they take out the rest of Hamas. He also acknowledged too many innocent people are being killed in Gaza. Biden also warned Israel it could lose global support if it continues to tolerate far-right figures such as National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and others. He has expressed confidence that Israel will stop its war in Gaza during Ramadan if an agreement is reached on the release of prisoners. Historically, Ramadan has been the worst time for Palestinians.
I think the only way Israel ultimately survives, and I make no bones about it, I get criticized for having said a long time ago, you need not be a Jew to be a Zionist. I'm a Zionist. Were there no Israel, there's not a Jew in the world to be safe.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell will step down as Republican leader in November. He announced his plans in an emotional speech on the Senate floor shortly after aides confirmed his plans to reporters. His voice cracking, he said, "This will be my last term as Republican leader of the Senate." He also said he's not going anywhere anytime soon. He will continue his job his colleagues have given him until he completes his term in November.
So I stand before you today, Mr. President, and my colleagues, to say this will be my last term as Republican leader of the Senate. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. However, I'll complete my job my colleagues have given me until we select a new leader in November and they take the helm next January.
The UN says none of its humanitarian aid convoys have reached northern Gaza since January 23rd, highlighting the dire humanitarian situation in the region. Spokesperson for the UN Secretary General Stefan Dujarric is stressing the need for more entry points and safe routes into Gaza. He says that the UN refugee agency, UNRWA, has food supplies at the border with Gaza that would be able to provide for up to 2.2 million people across the enclave. He also notes that 1,000 trucks carrying 15,000 metric tons of food are in Egypt awaiting permission to move. Israeli airstrikes in Gaza have killed at least 76 Palestinians within 24 hours, with civilian casualties mounting. The bombings targeting various neighborhoods, including Gaza City and Deir al-Balah, have resulted in numerous injuries and deaths. There are reports of casualties near hospitals and residential areas. 18 bodies were retrieved from near Nasser Hospital after Israeli tanks withdrew from the area. 2 infants reportedly succumbed to malnutrition and dehydration in Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, highlighting the escalating humanitarian crisis. Snipers are still taking up positions on rooftops of surrounding buildings. 3 Palestinians waiting for aid near Gaza City were killed after being hit by Israeli artillery fire on the coastal Al-Rashid Street, Wafa news agency reports. The Qassam Brigade, Hamas's military wing, launched missiles into North Israel from southern Lebanon, escalating tensions. In separate incidents, 2 Israeli soldiers were killed and 7 wounded in fighting in northern Gaza. 7 soldiers from the same unit were seriously wounded and evacuated from Gaza for medical treatment, the military said on social media. Israel's military has reported 238 soldiers killed since the ground invasion of Gaza started and a further 1,408 people injured. Additionally, Israeli forces conducted overnight raids in the occupied West Bank, resulting in the arrest of at least 35 Palestinians. Since October the 7th, Israeli forces have detained more than 7,305 Palestinians. The total death toll in Gaza since Israel launched its war in October stands at 29,878, with more than 70,215 wounded. Israeli fatalities from October 7th attacks are at 1,139. Pennsylvania Democratic Representative Summer Lee has withdrawn from an event organized by the Council on American Islamic Relations. She cited controversy surrounding other speakers' anti-Semitic and homophobic remarks. Initially scheduled to speak at the Philadelphia chapter event, Lee canceled her appearance after learning of the previous statements made by fellow speakers. Lee expressed solidarity with Muslim communities against rising hate and violence, but clarified that she does not endorse the other speakers' remarks. The decision came after Jewish Insider reported on the controversial comments. Lee, a progressive facing re-election, has been vocal about condemning Israel's war on Palestine. Criticism from opponents, including calls for her resignation, intensified after Lee's ties to pro-Palestinian activists were highlighted. One of Lee's Democratic challengers, Bhavani Patel, called on Lee not to participate in the CARE fundraiser. Patel earlier criticized the first-term Congresswoman for accepting campaign donations from pro-Palestinian activists who she claims have made anti-Semitic remarks about Israel. Pennsylvania Republican Senate candidate Dave McCormick called for Lee's resignation from Congress. Muslim lawyer challenges UK's political establishment over Gaza. Details come after the break. Stay tuned and we will be right back. Welcome back. British Muslim lawyer Mohammed Akunji criticized UK's political parties for supporting Israel's actions in Gaza, deeming the political system completely broken. The 46-year-old lawyer, specializing in crime and terrorism-related matters, has been a vocal critic of British support to Israel. In an interview with Anadolu news agency, Akunji announced his candidacy for Parliament in London. He emphasizes public discontent over UK's government stance on Gaza and condemns Conservative and Labour parties for ignoring public demands for a ceasefire, as well as an end to arms sales to Israel. Akunji has accused Labour Rushanara Ali for betraying her constituents by abstaining from a ceasefire vote. He has also highlighted Labour leader Keir Starmer's reversal on Gaza, citing a disconnect between the party's current stance and its historical support for Palestine. Akunji pledges to represent voters directly and is urging adherence to international law in Gaza. An Israeli-based nonprofit has documented more than 10 million instances of violent content on social media in Hebrew language in 2023. According to the center, the average hateful, violent posts or comments on social media in Hebrew has risen to around 23 per minute since October 7th. In a new report, the Arab Center for Advancement of Social Media said it has developed an AI-based language model that monitors hate speech and violence in Hebrew against Palestinians in real time. The center has documented 10 million incidents of violent content in Hebrew reported last year across 3 major social media platforms. It cites X as having 3/4 of the Hebrew violent content throughout 2023. This hate speech included perpetuating violence, justifying collective punishment, and exasperating the dehumanization of Palestinian people. It has been calling for developing effective Hebrew language classifiers to combat the surge in hate speech and hurt against Palestinians online, alongside a commitment to fighting hate speech and hurt in all languages to safeguard users globally. The Supreme Court is deliberating whether social media platforms have the right to ban content without violating the First Amendment. Arguments have focused on Florida and Texas laws targeting conservative content bans. While Florida's law was deemed unconstitutional by its appeals court, Texas laws were upheld. Justices have grappled with whether platforms like Facebook should be treated as common carriers or publishers akin to newspapers. Chief Justice John Roberts has pondered the implications for the, quote, modern public square. Concerns have been raised about regulating e-commerce sites like Etsy. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, shielding websites from content liability, featured prominently. Associate Justice Amy Coney Barrett has highlighted potential impacts on future cases. The court is set to issue a verdict this summer on the laws enacted after the January 6th Capitol insurrection, with broader implications for online regulation. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that the Conference on Disarmament has led to no meaningful disarmament year after year, emphasizing urgent need for reform. The conference is a multilateral forum to negotiate arms controls and disarmament agreements. It meets annually in 3 separate sessions in Geneva. Guterres has repeated this call to accelerate the implementation of all nuclear disarmament commitments. He's calling for enforcement of Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and to bring the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty into force. He says the conference's failure to produce results has contributed to a growing sense of cynicism about multilateral solutions. The UN's Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator says nearly 17 million people in Syria need humanitarian assistance. In a UN Security Council session on the Middle East, Martin Griffith warns that a staggering 16.7 million people require humanitarian assistance. That's nearly 3/4 of the Syrian population and the highest number of people in need since the start of the crisis. Citing the February 6, 2023 earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, Griffith says much more is still needed to address the long-term humanitarian impact of the earthquakes in Syria. He's urging the full restoration of basic services as well as the provision of adequate and appropriate shelters, particularly for displaced pregnant women and girls. He notes that the decline in essential facilities has increased Syrian people's reliance on humanitarian aid. He also stressed that the reduction in access to electricity, water, and cooking fuel has exacerbated the food insecurity and malnutrition situation. Griffiths is urging all parties involved to respect the international humanitarian law and take care to spare civilians and civilian infrastructure. Syria has been mired in a civil war since 2011, when the regime of President Bashar al-Assad cracked down on a pro-democracy protest. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and more than 10 million displaced, according to UN estimates. UK's police are accusing 3 men of plotting a terrorist attack on an Islamic center using a 3D printed firearm. The men are accused of obtaining extremist materials and joining neo-Nazi chat groups where they shared propaganda and discussed weapon creation. Prosecutors alleged that the 3 manufactured a 3D semi-automatic firearm known as an FGC-9 and identified potential targets. They were arrested in a planned operation, recovering a 3D printer and firearm components. A 4th person was released without charge. Appearing via video link, the defendants were remanded to custody pending a hearing at the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales. Their lawyers indicated plans to contest the charges. In the Netherlands, Uyghur activist Abdurrahman Uyghur disrupted a Lunar New Year event hosted by the Chinese embassy, condemning China's actions in the northwestern part of the country. Video footage circulated on social media shows the man shouting, "China, stop genocide," before being subdued by organizers. Abdurrahman held a sign asserting East Turkestan is not a part of China. He was fined after police intervention. Another activist, Abdurrahman Ghani, criticized the event for depicting Uyghurs happily, calling it propaganda to cover up the Chinese government's genocide. China's alleged mistreatment of Uyghurs involved imprisonment, forced labor, and religious restrictions. The US and other nations have called it genocide. The event featured the Chinese dancers in Uyghur attire, drawing outrage. The Dutch Uyghur Human Rights Foundation praised Abdurrahman's actions as courageous. That's all from our Washington, D.C. studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel or hit the bell icon for the latest updates. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.